Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into something that honestly sounds a bit like science fiction. A computer that runs on actual living human brain cells.
Yeah, it sounds wild, doesn't it? But it's real.
Totally. We've got these sources articles, notes all about a company, Cortical Labs, and their device, the CL1. It's a biological computer.
That's the term, yeah.
So our mission here is to figure out, what is this thing? How does this mix of biology and silicon actually work? What's it for? And frankly, what are the big kind of mind-bending questions it brings up?
Right. And what's really fascinating here, the core idea, is that the CL1 is a biological computer. So, Cortical Labs, they take human neurons,
Actual brain cells.
actual brain cells, yeah, and they cultivate them, keep them alive in this very specific nutrient-rich soup,
Oh,
essentially.
okay. Growing brain cells. But I mean, you can't just have cells in a dish and say, okay, compute. How do they connect the bio part to the tech part?
That's the clever bit, according to the sources. These neurons, they're grown right onto a silicon chip, a really high density one. Think of the chip less like a standard processor and more like an interface. It's got thousands of tiny electrodes.
Electrodes, okay.
And these can send electrical signals to the neurons, but also, crucially, read the electrical signals from the neurons.
Got it. So the chip is kind of the translator, the input-output port for the brain cells. And the sources mentioned this closed loop system. What's that about?
Yes, exactly. That closed loop is how it all works together. It's like a continuous conversation.
Okay.
The chip sends signals in maybe representing like a simple pattern or a game environment.
Like Pong. We'll get to that.
Like Pong, yeah.
Yeah.
The neurons react, fire off their own electrical signals. The chip reads those responses, figures out what happened, and then sends new signals back as feedback, telling the neurons how they did relative to some goal in the simulation.
Ah, okay. So it's like they're interacting with this virtual world
Yeah.
electrically, and the system is sort of teaching them through feedback signals.
Precisely. It's a learning process.
And Cortical Labs, they have a specific term for this, don't they? Something like synthetic biological intelligence.
That's the one, SBI. Synthetic biological intelligence. It really captures what they're aiming for, building a kind of intelligence using biological parts mixed with, well, synthetic systems, different from standard AI.
SBI. Okay. Sounds impressive. But let's ground this a bit. The sources are pretty clear. This isn't going to replace your laptop anytime soon, right? You won't be playing Cyberpunk on brain cells.
Huh, no, not even close. The CL1 has a really specific job right now. It's for advanced research. Think neuroscience, biotech.
Yeah.
Its real value is in, studying how brains work, maybe developing new therapies, helping with scientific trials, especially for brain-related diseases.
And it's not just a concept in a lab somewhere. The sources say it's the world's first commercially available biological computer. That sounds like a big step.
It is a significant step, yeah. They're aiming for wider availability late 2025, apparently. And the price tag mentioned, around $35,000. Yeah, that tells you who it's for. Research labs, institutions. Not you or me buying it for home.
Right. Definitely a specialized tool.
Hmm.
So why is this useful for brain research? I mean, we have incredibly powerful silicon computers. What does this biological approach offer that they don't? What do the sources highlight?
Well, one big thing is getting a deeper look at how brain cells actually process information, how they learn at that fundamental level. But maybe more immediately practical is medical testing,
Medical testing, how so?
specifically for drugs targeting neurological or psychiatric conditions, things like Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, depression.
Ah, okay. And there's a quote that jumped out at me from Brett Kagan, Cortical Labs chief scientific officer.
Yeah.
He said something about how drugs for these brain conditions often fail because the brain has so much more nuance than the models scientists currently use for testing.
Exactly. That's a key point from the sources. He argues these biological systems, these neurons on a chip, might let researchers actually see and test against that biological nuance in a way silicon models just can't replicate.
So it's potentially a much better model of actual brain tissue.
That's the idea. Silicon is great for calculations, logic, but it doesn't have the same, squishy, complex biological dynamics of living neurons. So testing a drug on this system could give a much better prediction of how it might work in a real brain.
Okay, that makes sense.
And Kagan also brought up another really important angle: ethics.
Also,
The hope, he said, is that this kind of tech could eventually replace a lot of animal testing in medical research, which he framed as an ethically good thing.
wow, okay. Producing animal testing would be huge. That definitely gives it a real world weight, doesn't it? It's not just cool tech for tech's sake.
Right.
Now, this whole idea blending biology and computers, it feels super cutting edge, almost sci-fi. But the sources mention the basic concept isn't entirely new.
Not at all, actually. It's kind of surprising. The idea of merging biological wetware with artificial hardware goes way back. The sources point to thinking in the, 1940s and 50s.
Seriously, back then.
Yeah, long before the tech caught up, obviously. But for ages, we've basically had these two main types of computers, right? Silicon ones super fast at math and biological ones like our brains, which do, well, consciousness, learning, adapting, all that nuance Kagan talked about. People have wondered for a long time if you could somehow combine the strengths of both.
And the CL1, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It grew out of an earlier project that really put this idea on the map, didn't it?
Absolutely. You're thinking dish brain.
Dishbrain, yes,
Yeah.
that's the one. The system that learned to play Pong back in 2022. That made waves.
It really did. The results were published in Neuron, a major journal.
And the way the sources describe how Dishbrain played Pong, it's fascinating. It wasn't like it was just running Pong software.
No, not at all.
The description makes it sound like the neurons, through that feedback loop we talked about, kind of learned to interact with the Pong simulation almost as if they were the paddle, experiencing the game electrically. It wasn't just code. It was like embodied learning in a dish.
That really shows how different this kind of computing is. It's not following rigid instructions line by line. It's a system adapting, responding to a changing environment based on these simple electrical reward or, well, feedback signals.
Which is cool, but it also leads directly into some pretty tricky territory the sources bring out.
Uh-huh. The ethics.
Yeah. The whole question of, sentience, consciousness. If you create these biological entities connected to computers, could they, I don't know, suffer, get bored? It feels like a really important, if uncomfortable, question.
It's definitely a heavy one, and the sources do say that Cortical Labs didn't ignore this. They worked with bioethicists.
Okay, that's good.
And the consensus presented, for now at least for the current state of things with the CL1, is that sentience or suffering isn't really seen as a concern yet.
Okay, why not? What's the reasoning?
Well, there's a quote from Suhas Kumar, someone from Sandia National Labs. He basically explained that even though the setup sounds complex, functionally, the systems are still quite simple.
Simple how?
The neurons are mostly just reacting to specific electrical nudges within very controlled conditions. They don't have the sheer scale, complexity, or the kind of organization we associate with consciousness or the ability to feel things like boredom or pain.
Right, so it's more like a very sophisticated reflex arc at this stage, maybe?
Kind of, yeah. It's responding to stimulus, but likely without any internal experience accompanying it.
But the sources are careful to add a big but.
They are. They make the point that this is really just the first step. Technology moves fast. As these neural networks on chips get bigger, more complex, that ethical picture could change, and maybe change quickly.
This raises an important question then, doesn't it? Where do you draw the line? As this synthetic biological intelligence gets more sophisticated, how do we even define intelligence or consciousness or even life, maybe, in these hybrid forms?
Exactly. These are the big looming questions the technology forces us to confront.
Cortical Labs, though, they seem pretty bullish on SBI. They argue it's, what was the phrase, inherently more natural than AI.
Yeah, their argument is that because it uses the same basic building blocks as our own brain's neurons, it's somehow closer to natural intelligence than purely silicon-based AI.
And the sources suggest that because of that biological foundation, as the tech improves, it might start producing results that feel, well, more like how a human mind works,
Yeah.
blurring those lines even further.
That seems to be the projection, which could be incredibly powerful, but also, yeah, keeps bringing us back to those fundamental questions.
Here's where it gets really interesting, this blurring of the lines. The sources talk about it blurring the distinction between the world's two greatest computers, silicon and biological.
Yeah, the ones we build and the ones we are. It really forces a new perspective on what computation even means.
So what does this all mean? Let's try to wrap this up. We've gone through the source material on Cortical Labs and their CL1 biological computer.
And we've seen it's this really novel system, right? Living human neurons connected directly to a silicon chip interface.
Yep. And it's designed not for everyday computing, but as a serious new tool for research labs, neuroscience, biotech.
Right, offering potentially, a much more nuanced way to study brain cells, how they work, how they learn, and a big potential impact in drug discovery.
Especially for those tricky brain disorders, maybe offering a better model than we have now, and with that ethical hope of reducing animal testing down the line.
Definitely. And then there are the bigger questions. While the sources suggest current systems are too simple for, like, real consciousness concerns,
Uh-huh.
their very existence and where this tech is heading, it just opens up this whole area of profound questions about intelligence, what it means to be sentient, and the ethics of creating these increasingly complex biocomputers.
The sources really frame the CL1 not just as some lab curiosity, but as a real commercially available tool that could shake up major research fields. And yeah, challenge how we think about computers and maybe even life itself.
It's literally building a bridge, isn't it,
Mhm.
between biology and artificial systems,
Right.
right there on a chip.
So consider that idea from the sources. This tech is actively blurring the lines between silicon and biological computing. As this synthetic biological intelligence evolves, what new kinds of intelligence might emerge? And what does that mean for us, for our understanding of ourselves? That's something to chew on.
It really is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the CL1. We hope you found it as fascinating as we did.